This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station. The Property Show on BFM 89.9, the business station.
Good morning, I'm Melisa Idris, and it's just past 9:36 a.m. Time now for the Property Show on the Morning Run, where we talk about all things property. Joining me on the show this morning is Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. He's the Senior Fellow at the Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, or better known as IDEAS. He's also an adjunct faculty member at INTI International College in Subang, where he teaches history of economic thought and microeconomic theory and policy. Welcome, Dr. Ferlito. Welcome to the show.
Thank you and good morning.
Property prices have been in sharp focus lately. We've had the finance minister this week making multiple comments about the price of land, about construction costs being SST exempt. I'd like you to, help the everyday homeowner understand what goes into the price of property. Why are property prices so sky high right now?
These are basically two questions. One issue is how prices actually arise in the market. Mm-hmm. The second one is more strictly related to the property market in Malaysia and why in this specific moment property prices are so high. As everybody knows, prices arise from the interaction between supply and demand in the market. This, expansion, this boom started more or less 10 years ago, after the big financial crisis in the Western world, as all the booms was driven by positive profit expectations. That means that entrepreneurs investing in the property market perceive that the future prices of that properties will be able to cover the costs and give them a reasonable profit. Otherwise, they would not do that. Right. So they are doing a comparison between the actual prices, the actual costs, and so the so-called structure of relative prices and the expectations of future prices. Okay. When this boom started, very much driven by this kind of consideration about expectations, it started in the high-end sector.
In the high-end property sector?
Yes.
You're talking about $1 million and above?
I would include also above $500,000.
Okay, so anything above
$500,000.
500,000 ringgit
Yes.
and above.
So the boom started there. And in my study, the paper that was published by IDEAS a couple of months ago, I showed how these investment decisions were not wrong. Because indeed, the demand for high-end properties was growing faster than the demand for the so-called affordable housing. So entrepreneurs that are every day in the market, they don't do something because they think they are going to lose money. Right. They are usually smart enough to take good entrepreneurial choices. So they invested there because they saw profit opportunities there. And this was justified by the demand dynamic back then.
Okay, so this was what caused the boom in the high-end property market.
And as I wrote in the paper, the peak of this boom was reached in 2013. A few days ago, on The Edge, it seems that other economists are telling the same, so I'm no more alone in admitting a turning point in the market.
Well, I do want to just address that point, because when you came out with that paper, part of that paper was a warning that there was a property bubble and that this bubble could burst, right? Yes. And I think you were alone in that respect at that point in time. So there was a lot of concern as to, suddenly there's talk of a property bubble when previously there wasn't. So come back to the issue of the house prices. What happened after 2013?
Well, we have to, when we analyze a boom, that is the real moment to be analyzed when we want to talk about a crisis. Allow me to say that usually when there is a crisis, economists and policymakers try to address the crisis and how to solve it. But the right moment in which we should focus on a potential crisis is during a boom.
Because everything that goes up must come down.
Must come down. If we understand the dynamic of the boom, then we know how to address the crisis. When the crisis is happening, then it's a bit too late to address the problem. If we analyze the typical dynamic of a boom, it always consists of two moments. The first moments that I just described, profit opportunities are expected and entrepreneurs therefore investing in a certain sector. Then there is always a second run of imitators, people that see the market going up and they try not to be left out from that profit opportunities. And usually these second comers are not experienced entrepreneurs, are people that try to make a profit on the wave of the enthusiasm, okay, when the market is already hot.
Right.
And this round of second comers usually inflate the boom beyond its natural size, often supported by favorable credit policy.
Okay, that means easy to get loans.
Easy to get loans, which in Malaysia is not that bad as it was in Europe and in the US 15 years ago, but yet we had the moment of credit relax, I would say, that helped the second wave of the boom and therefore made this boom oversized. So the amount of potential malinvestments became bigger than what that could be without this kind of monetary manipulation. And monetary manipulation is important because it's altering the structure of prices. Because in a way, financing certain sectors, you are telling that investment in a certain sector might be cheaper than others, and therefore you are indirectly driving entrepreneurial choices
to go into that sector.
Without a real economic justification, but just a financial one.
Okay, so the ease of availability for loans makes the choice to go into that asset class easier. Right?
So the boom continued beyond its natural course, supported by credit, and somehow I believe that if certain entrepreneurs would have realized that some opportunities were instead in the affordable market sector when in the high end were fading out, they could have moved there, but the heavy presence of government direct action through agencies in the affordable housing sector for sure crowded out these potential investments from the private developers.
Right. Okay. So help me make sense of this. And this was something that you brought up in your paper that I thought was quite fascinating. Help me understand what that means. So the fact that there are multiple government agencies developing affordable houses means that property developers, instead of naturally moving into where the demand is, decided not to go into it.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, entrepreneurs know the market. At a certain point, for sure, they realized that the opportunities in the high-end sector were slowly disappearing because, and now everybody is saying we have a lot of unsold units. Entrepreneurs, investors know this. We don't have to tell them this. And they might think, hey, this is the moment to go into the affordable housing market because maybe the profit might be lower but might also be safer because indeed we know that there is demand for that now. So it makes sense for private developers to move there. But then what happened? You find that the government is there with 20 agencies that now might become 6. We are waiting for the new housing policy that was announced. Let's see what's going to happen. But when you find that the government is heavily involved, actively involved in an economic activity, are you really going to play competition toward government? Or you think, maybe it's too risky, government doesn't need a profit, they play on a different side, on a different level, so might be a suicide to go there. So better, now I have no alternative than staying where I am and further putting money into the high-end sector, even if it is not totally economically reasonable to do so.
We're speaking to Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at the think tank Ideas. More with the Property Show shortly. Stay tuned. BFM 89.9. Good morning. If you've just joined us, this is the Property Show. I'm Melisa Idris, and here in the studio with me is Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at Ideas, the think tank, or Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. We're talking about, the headlines coming out, talking about the high prices of property right now and what goes into it. So there's couple of comments made by the former Prime Minister, Dr. Sri Najib Razak, that it's land prices that makes a huge component of how the property developers price the property, and that's what causes it to be unaffordable. In fact, construction costs being SST exempt, that's a tiny little fraction of how that can be passed on in terms of savings to the consumer. Is that true? Are all properties priced on how much the land is?
Well, for sure, the land plays a big role on this. Now, I don't really have a percentage, if I have to be honest, but we have constructions, we have some materials, raw materials, we have labor.
Compliance costs
compliances.
as well.
So I will not put the blame on land totally for sure, because in the end, the final price of a property is the result of too many considerations. It's not only the land. Again, costs, of course, plays a role in the level at which you fix a price. But then, as I mentioned before, the final judge is the market. So you can charge whatever you want, but if nobody is buying, then there's no way for your initiative to be successful.
Right. So right now we're seeing a glut, an oversupply in the residential property markets. Do you see then market forces coming into play and prices coming down naturally through property developers themselves reducing prices? Or do you think there should be some government involvement in terms of, we've heard the finance minister applying, say, moral suasion to the property developers to reduce prices?
Again, I think that the market will be the best player in pursuing a politics of moral suasion, in the sense that very much will depend on what the government decide with the housing policy. But if we allow the crisis to happen and to make its own course, then we will see naturally prices going down.
What do you mean allow the crisis to happen? So let the property bubble burst?
Yes.
Okay. All my red flags are up. So what does that mean? Would that be a risk? I'm sure that could mean that there's a fundamental risk to the economy.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, the constructor sector plays a big role in Malaysia. In the past 10 years has grown 3 times faster compared with the national GDP. While we had the GDP growing at an average of 5%, the construction sector grew up at 14% per year on an average. So, of course, the relative weight of the construction sector in the Malaysian economy has grown fast. And, of course, whatever is going to happen in the property market will affect the general economy. Said that, in the moment in which certain choices were taken, we can't avoid sooner or later this crisis to happen. So what I'm suggesting is that if we are going to adopt measures like some measures that were announced, more easy credit, we are going to prolong the boom and to give people the impression that the market is healthy, in a healthy moment, and houses are affordable because there is government support. But this will only delay the moment of the bursting and make the situation worse, because people will get more into debt in order just being misguided by these announcements and by these credit policies. Instead, if we let the market to clear out the situation, we might go out of an eventual crisis at a faster pace. This doesn't mean that it will be painless.
Oh dear.
Every crisis has its fair dose of pain.
Who will it be more painful for, the house buyer or the property developer?
I believe mostly the people that are involved with the industry. So if developers are going anyway to suffer, there might be consequences on employment level.
Right.
Contracts,
yeah.
Contracts, and so all the people that are supplying to the developers are losing contracts. But this somehow is the only way, because mistakes were made. That means that resources and capital were put into investments that were not sound with the actual consumer preferences. And in order to have this capital structure to get realigned with consumer preferences, that in this case means get, in example, affordable housing rather than more expensive housing, we need the process of readjustment. A crisis, even if the terms is always referred to as negative, from an economist standpoint, is the necessary clear out process. It's like, if you allow me the example, when you get drunk and you need to vomit to empty your stomach of the poison you got in, and after you will suffer, it will be painful, but once you wake up, you are better. And there is no way to cure drunkenness with more alcohol. When we are offering more credit, it's like going to offer more alcohol to someone that is already drunk.
So what does that mean for property owners, Dr. Ferlito? Does that mean that their valuation of their houses could be impacted should this property bubble burst?
Definitely. I mean, if you bought a house in this moment for investment, it might take much longer time for you to get this investment paid back, both if your intention was to sell the house or to rent it out. I've seen, example, I live in Subanjaya, where I rented the place where I stay now 4 years ago, and I can see how prices for rental in the same area, even in the same building, are already going down of an average of 20%.
Wow. Okay. And that's just market forces correcting
Just
itself.
market forces.
Okay.
In the moment in which I decided eventually to move, I got already discount on my rent. Okay, I take my personal example, but if you do a research on rental, you can see that prices are already much cheaper compared to 5 years ago.
Can we talk a little bit about affordability? Because that's a separate matter. So I do want to make sure that we're not conflating the two issues. Property prices are one thing. Affordability of houses is another. It's a more structural issue, and it has to do with wages as well, right? Talk to me a little bit about the issue of affordability, the question of unaffordability here in Malaysia.
Well, I think that partially depends on mentality. So compared to other countries, it seems to me that Malaysians feel the obligation to buy a house and to buy it fast. They graduate, they get married, they think that if they are not able to afford a house, this is like a social minus, a social handicap, because they can't afford to buy a house. If we go back to Europe, we have a different kind of approach. We all believe that house is like your life investment, and we all expect in Europe then to be able to buy a house when we are already at a mature stage of our working career. Let's say on an average, I'm not talking about rich people or too poor people. Let's say talking about the middle class, we know that maybe you will be able to buy a property when you are already in the 40s or in the 50s. This is a quite common mentality in Europe. In here, it seems that there is the expectation to get out of college and get a job that make you able to buy a property, or to find a property that is consistent with your fresh graduate income. I think this is something that is a mentality that will be challenged and is under challenge in this moment. So people need to reconsider their expectations.
Sure, yeah. I definitely agree with you.
This is one side of the coin. The other, as I mentioned before, it is true that there is a demand for houses that are, let's say, below 400,000 or 300,000 ringgit. And it is possible to build this kind of houses. So what I see is an opportunity for investors, for developers to move into this sector. Is an opportunity that might help to ease the pain of the crisis, because they find different or profit opportunities.
That's where the demand is as well.
Because capital restructuration is very difficult. If you have money invested in materials for building high-end properties, and then you would have to build cars, let's say, or kitchen equipment, that will be difficult to convert that capital into that. But if you are going to move from high-end properties to affordable housing, then it might more easy to reshape your capital structure, because in the end, the kind of things, the raw materials that you need are the same in terms of construction materials, workers with certain skills. So that will make easier to absorb the impact of the crisis. But again, as I mentioned several times, I believe that to make this possible, government will have to digest the bitter reality of stepping back from direct involvement in that kind of industry.
Why do you think there is so much government involvement in the affordable housing segment?
I want to believe that it is this kind of involvement is driven by good feelings. I want to believe that government realize that there are people that can't afford certain properties, that they want to have the safety of a house. So I understand the social concern, and I might agree with the social concern. As a government, you care of
You want to take
rakyat.
care of your people, yes.
You want to take care of your people. We have also to seriously and technically discuss what's the best way to take care of this problem. And I strongly believe that in general, market is able to deliver better solutions than the government. Not on ideological basis. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to give the impression that I'm against the government. I only say, as a technical person, as an economist, I say, listen, the government lack that involvement with the market that give you access to the necessary information that is needed to build a sound plan, while private investors, private developers, entrepreneurs are in the market every day. So that kind of knowledge that is necessary in order to build a sound investment plans is at disposal and evolving through market interaction. Being the government, by definition, outside of the market, they can lack the information that is necessary to build a sound plan. So let's agree on the social concern, but address it in a different way.
In a nutshell, if I could summarize what you've just said, let market forces correct itself, but to get there, there's likely to be a bit of pain.
Yes, definitely.
I've been speaking to Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at the think tank Ideas. Thank you for being on the show and helping us make sense of what's happening in the property market.
Thank you for having invited me. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to The Property Show. Now we'll be back next Friday with a look at more issues in the property sector. But we've got the 10 o'clock news bulletin coming up shortly. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the morning run and handing it over to Frida Liu and Richard Bradbury of Enterprise. So stay tuned. BFM 89.9.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.